South Carolina and Ole Miss fans have every right to be upset, but they should be pissed off not because they didn't get in, but the fact the committee thought a 9-3 Bama team was good enough to be in front of Miami, but the other two 9-3 SEC teams with similar strength of record weren't. This isn't a Bama shouldn't be in the college football playoff conversation. When compared to South Carolina and Ole Miss, you know how I feel about that. I can understand it. But what is the methodology in keeping them behind Miami? The math doesn't add up. And the answers from Ward Manuel only add fuel to the conspiratorial fire. They got to stop letting that dude talk. It's a disaster every time he opens his mouth. It also leaves open that two things happened. One, they wanted Bama in because of the brand, and to avoid claims of SEC bias, they threw Miami and the ACC a bone and put the Canes right behind the Tide. Or two, they really didn't think the debate between Alabama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss was that close, which is even more nuts in my opinion. If they really wanted to be consistent, they would have put Bama 11, Ole Miss 12, and South Carolina 13, or South Carolina 12 and Ole Miss 13, and then put Miami 14. At least by doing that, they could combat the SEC bias narrative by only including Alabama in the 12 and leaving the SEC with the first two teams out. But they didn't. They've waffled back and forth through their own words on if head-to-head matters this week the most or strength of record matters this week the most, and they have continued to contradict themselves at every single turn. It's also not Alabama fans, players, or coaches' fault that they got in. Now, does Bama get the benefit of the doubt pretty much every time and more than everybody else? Yes, they do. But this year, I can see why they're in. It's the order behind them that should cause the most frustration and the most questions to be asked. David Cohn, former Michigan quarterback. My brother, former Western State Colorado wide receiver Blaine Crain. David, I looked around. We got the rankings pulled up, and I want to go through them. But first, I've looked around everywhere. I've rewatched the selection show. I've seen all the quote unquote reporters that have insight. I have not seen one person give me one good explanation, not on why Alabama is in, but why they are in front of Miami, yet Ole Miss and South Carolina are behind Miami. Do you have an explanation for me?
All right, first things first, I'm going to try and be as measured as I possibly can in my comments about Ward Manuel. He's a Michigan man. He's the athletic director. He's done some good things in that role. I do find it frustrating that he's not able to better articulate the reasoning of the committee when he gets on national TV and he's given the opportunity, because the three of us are here covering the sport for a living, diving as deep as we possibly can, and we're live on television 90 minutes every day trying to give the same reasoning but with less authority. That is very disappointing because I was left more confused after hearing him speak, but we can get into that more later. For your comments here, the first thing I want to say for anyone who's very frustrated with the College Football Playoff Committee today, just understand, if you take the College Football Playoff rankings, you take Crain and Company's rankings, and you take the AP's rankings, they're almost identical except for that last spot in question. And I'm not going to sit here and cry over 3-loss and 2-loss teams. Remember, we said we weren't going to do this. 2004, Auburn got left out for being undefeated. We said that can't be the case in the BCS. They have to play for a national championship. So then we had a 4-team playoff, and an undefeated Florida State got left out last year. We said that's unacceptable, but certainly the vitriol won't be as heated when we're talking about the 11th, 12th, and 13th seeds who have multiple losses. So I'm not going to sit here and cry. If you have 3 losses or if you have 2 losses, you should have won those football games. To your question about Alabama and Miami, one of two things is happening. Either the first one that you said is what's happening, where it's a brand play, okay, and they decided to split. They decided to split Miami in the middle of that sort of that tranche there of SEC schools that have the 3 losses that we've been talking about. Either they did that and they said, look, we want to get Alabama in there. We're going to put them at 11, knowing that 12th seed is probably going to slide out. Similar thinking to last year with Florida State. Hey, Florida State's not the 4th best team because their quarterback's hurt, but we'll put them as the 5th best team. No, if they're not the 4th, they're not the 5th best team. Put them at 9, put them at 10. Either that's what's happening, and it could be, Or maybe the committee is just legitimately saying, look, it's our job to identify the 12 best teams. We think that Alabama's better than Miami, but Miami's better than Ole Miss and South Carolina. Maybe I'm being too naive. Maybe I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that that's what's happening, because I've seen Miami beat teams that I believe are better than a couple of the teams Ole Miss and South Carolina lost to, Kentucky, LSU. I hope that that's what's happening. What I'd be very interested to see is how different would this ranking be if it were an 8-team playoff, and how different would it be if it were a 16-team playoff? Because when we come in here every week and do ours, we're just legitimately saying, here's the team, here's the next team, here's the next team. There's no other consideration other than that. Would this order be different if the number of teams in the playoff were different?
And a couple things. You articulated that way better than Ward Manuel ever could. And listen, I don't know Ward Manuel personally. He may be a great guy. He may be. He doesn't need to be doing this.
Yeah.
If I want the eye test and somebody telling me what's wrong with my kidneys, I want to talk to a doctor, not the guy that owns the land the hospital was built on. We have to stop putting people in these places that may know a little bit about surface level, may know my kidneys hurt, but don't understand really what's wrong with them or how to fix it. That's a big problem we have. We've talked about it a million times. I don't want to demean his character. I think he's in a bad spot. I think he's in over his head. I think Reese Davis tried as much as possible to help him.
Yes.
It was almost like watching, a debate where they favor one party over the other, where they try and help them get to that point. I thought Reese Davis did a good job of that. And Blaine, I'm just going to get to you in a second into the chat. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We got calls open in 2:45. I'll get to that in a second. But to your second point, because I'm leaning more toward the first one, where they threw a bone to the ACC and didn't want to make it look like it was SEC bias and put Ole Miss behind Bama, South Carolina behind them, and then Miami, which in fact, to me, would have had the exact opposite effect. Your first two teams out are SEC teams. There's no way I can accuse you of SEC bias then. The second one, even if you said, listen, we think Alabama's better than Miami, but Miami is better than Ole Miss and Miami is better than South Carolina. How? How is that?
You haven't been watching football.
Like that just makes me think that, because if you look at all the numbers, that doesn't play out. If you look at eye test, that doesn't play out. If you look at how the teams finished, that doesn't play out. And then to that point as well, is Alabama a team better than Ole Miss or South Carolina?
So what if they had put Miami in front of those three?
I would have actually been okay with that.
Which
I would have been more okay, because that at least makes sense. If you said we think a 10-2, because Miami's 10-2. If you just said, you know what, Miami's 10-2.
But what if that wasn't the reasoning though? What if it was because, we think Miami's better than
I could believe that.
Okay. What about
I could believe that. Not that.
If Miami had been at 11 there.
They're saying off the eye test that they think they're better?
Yes, rather than just on the record. Because see, here's my biggest takeaway from yesterday, and it's not just in that spot. It's also with the spot that we're going to talk about when it comes to Georgia, Buckeyes, Tennessee, and then the one-loss teams. The committee is clearly saying here, they're not evaluating each record the same, which is what fans wanted 3 weeks ago. They were saying a 10-2 team from one conference, that's not the same as a 9-3 team from another conference. And right there, I'm looking at Georgia, Buckeyes, and Tennessee, all with multiple losses ahead of a one-loss SMU and ahead of a one-loss Indiana. Well, I'm looking at the same thing when it comes to the 2- and 3-loss teams. They're saying a 9-3 Alabama team is better than a 10-2 Miami, but then that 10-2 Miami is better than a 9-3 Ole Miss team. So they're doing what most fans wanted and saying, no, it's about the best teams. But anytime you're going to have a phrase that's that subjective, we're going to be in this scenario arguing.
With that, and to that point, but by putting Miami behind Alabama there and saying we think this 10-2 Miami team is better than those two, but not Alabama. If Alabama and Ole Miss and South Carolina weren't that close, I think that could be a legitimate argument. But to me, they're unbelievably close. We've talked about it for 2 weeks, that the reason that we would have Alabama over South Carolina is the head-to-head. The argument against Ole Miss is a little bit more in the weeds because Alabama did not play Ole Miss. I just don't know where you splice that. So to me, what you're saying is, if a 10-2 Miami team, and Blaine, actually, I want to get what you think first. What do you think? And then I want to get to this SMU thing.
Well, what makes me mad, what pisses me off the most is why Ward Manuel said he put Alabama over Miami. And I can read it to you right here. He says, What we put Bama over the top of Miami is the last spot. So Miami went 1-2 in their last 3 games by an average of 4-5 to ranked opponents. And they put Alabama over for going 2-1 against Auburn and Mercer and whoever they lost to. Oklahoma. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, yeah, now do South Carolina.
Well, and look, Miami's losses too. I mean, I know Miami's athletic directors out here saying, look, our 2 losses are to Georgia Tech and Syracuse. Those are really good football
Georgia Tech team that
with
took
great
Georgia
quarterbacks.
to 8 overtime.
Those are I don't say better or worse losses, but respectable. Those are respectable losses. But again, you lost twice, so that's why you're in this situation. And I'm not going to have pity for you when we start arguing about 2 or 3 lost teams. My question for you guys here, I have 2 of them when it goes to a little bit higher in the order. Yesterday, we put ours as Georgia, Ohio, and then, no, we put ours as Georgia, Tennessee, and then Ohio, which was the same as the AP had. But I think it was at the very end of yesterday's show, we did say, hey, what happens if they split those? That could happen too, because then you'd have a scenario possibly where Tennessee has to go to the horseshoe rather than the other way around, and that's exactly what we got there. How do you guys feel about Georgia, Buckeyes, and then Tennessee 7?
See, I can understand that. I'm fine with that. I think this is a great argument to have, right? Because you can make a good argument for Tennessee being in front of Ohio State, I think. But you could also make a good argument for Ohio State being in front of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. When you look at Ohio State, they beat Penn State and lost to a Michigan team that was down. When you look at Tennessee, they beat Alabama, right? Lost to Georgia, which isn't an awful loss on the road, the team that's ranked 5th, and then lost to an Arkansas team, right, that didn't finish the season great. I think there's some parallels between Michigan and Arkansas, even though Ohio State lost that game at home. Tennessee went on the road and lost it, and that's when Arkansas was playing well. But I can have that conversation with you. You can rationalize the Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee. You can rationalize Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio State. David, I think you could rationalize Ohio State, Georgia, and Tennessee if you really wanted to. But that's an argument where, listen, they're all 3 right there. That makes sense. It's the other stuff that doesn't make sense to me with Miami. And that, to me, is more important. Yes, seeding and if you get to play at home or who you play, that's important. But you're in. We're arguing about teams and parties that are in the playoff. The most important is just like when we do March Madness in college basketball at the end. All anybody really cares about, unless you're fighting for a 1 or a 2 seed, is who gets in at the end. Mm-hmm. That's where the most controversy gets stirred up.
So, go ahead.
I would say at the end of the day, guys, it's a TV show. It's a TV show. It's about money. It's about ratings.
The games are the ultimate
say what
TV
we want,
show.
but they're going to make the best decision that fills their pockets.
Well, again, you say fill their pockets, but is it like they fill their pockets by having the best matchups in the games, right? And that's what we all want.
But that's where the best bias comes from.
Well, again, like you say that, and I understand that, but do you think people would be that pissed if Miami was in front of Alabama and Miami had to play Notre Dame? That's a huge,
I would love to. I mean, I'd love to see that. I mean, one point, and this is from Josh Pate's a buddy of ours. We have a lot of respect for him, and he's not the only one. But for the people who are saying, oh, everybody thought conference expansion would get rid of the oligarchy in the sport, but we're sitting here arguing over Alabama with 3 losses and Clemson with multiple losses. That overlooks the fact that SMU and Indiana and Boise State are all above them right now. How great is that?
And that's exactly right. And to that point, and again, we love Josh. And I love that we disagree because Josh loves the sport like we do. He actually loves college football like we do. Here's where I disagree with him on that. Number one, this is the way the world works. The rich get richer. The rich are always going to get richer, whether it's in the tax code, whatever, in college football. But now at least the poor have a chance to become rich. It's like for taxes, for example. If you're a middle-class person, and at the beginning we said, we're going to give rich people tax cuts, you'd be pissed off, right? Because you don't have a chance to get those tax cuts. But would you be happy if I came to you and said, listen, we're going to give rich people double the tax cuts, but now we're going to give you a tax cut too? I'd feel a lot better about that. There's no way you can say that expanding the playoff has hurt the little guy. You can say that it's helped the guys on top. Yes, it has. I agree with you, but 2 things can be true at once. 12 is more than 4. Not only that, we get an automatic bid. It's about access. Here's where I get upset at the group of 5 protesters. You want access. This gives you guaranteed access. Not only that, we're talking about Boise State finishing in the top 4 and getting a bye. So then on the other hand, they say, oh, well, now we have access, but we got to play more games once we get it. So it's even harder. This ain't Burger King, dog. You can't have it your way. You're lucky they're letting you in this thing. I'm glad that I don't love the auto bid, but I love that G5s can get in it. I'm just sick of the crying. You wanted access, you've got access. That's like complaining about not being let in the party. Then they finally let you in the house party. Then you want to complain about how long the line is at the keg. This isn't how it works. So I don't buy into that.
My final question on this for you, and this deals directly with SMU, because I do believe that most people on the committee are trying to do the best they can to identify the best 12 football teams in this scenario. Again, that's subjective, so someone's always going to say that they're wrong in that matter, but if that's their job, they're trying to identify the best 12 football teams, and SMU goes out in the ACC championship game and performs the way that Indiana did against the Buckeyes when SMU goes and plays Clemson. That's going to be the last thing on the mind less than 24 hours before Selection Sunday. And if we had been making a Selection Sunday 24 hours after Indiana lost to the Buckeyes, I think most people would have said they would be left out. It just so happens they got help with Alabama and Ole Miss losing. I'm just starting to smell something real funny here, that if SMU loses this game
and they're out,
that they could be out, and the reason being because the committee members are legitimately trying to do what they're tasked with. I'm not saying that there's some conspiracy. I think that there could be a scenario where they're legitimately saying who are the best 12 teams. SMU didn't put a product on the field yesterday when all eyes were on them that warrant being the best 12 teams, so they make the decision to leave them out, and that will crush conference championships moving forward.
And David, this is where putting Miami where you did screwed you. This is why I think they're really not as smart as what they think they are. Because let me run the scramble out for a second. If you're Alabama, you want SMU to win. You want Clemson to be out. I think the only chance that Alabama has now of being out is if SMU loses to Clemson and they keep SMU in.
Yes.
If you would have put in Miami where Alabama was and SMU lost, and then you put SMU out and said, no, Miami's going to be the last team in, as I think you could have gotten away with it more. But now, by putting Miami, who finished third in the ACC, SMU finished second, who finished 10-2, SMU finished 11-1, by putting Miami at 12, now I feel like you have to put SMU at 11 if they lose to Clemson. Because what you're saying is, and you think it doesn't make sense now, try and justify putting an SMU team behind Miami, or putting them behind Alabama, and then people saying, wait a minute, you said Alabama was just a bit better than Miami. And we can have conversations about a 10-2 team versus a 9-3 team. We talk about this all the time. But SMU's got 11 wins, regardless of what happens, in that same conference, with their only loss, David, coming to BYU, who is sitting right there at 18, who I think got screwed a little bit too, if we're going to be honest, where they're, not that they should have got in, but where they're at. So I think the committee put themselves in an even bigger hole. Now, if I'm Rhett Lashley and I saw Miami at 12, I would be rejoicing. I would be rejoicing because now you've given me an avenue to sit here and say, whoa. How on one hand is Miami one tick behind Alabama at 10-2 in the ACC, but we went 11-1, our only loss to a top 18 team by your rankings. We have one more win than them, and we played an extra game than them, yet we're going to go behind Alabama too? So you're saying Alabama is that much better than anybody that played in the ACC at 9-3? That, to me, is where that was stupid as well.
That could be a good sign that they're not 3D chessing this thing, that they're just saying these are the teams that we think are the best in this order.
Is there a number that SMU has to lose by? If they lose,
I really hope we don't get.
Well, again, David, I don't know, though.
We had that same conversation before Indiana played that game. You and I had that conversation. Like, what happens if they lose by 20? What happens if they lose by 30, et cetera?
Let me ask you this, and I want to get to the chat. I know the chat is buzzing. What has to happen for Tennessee to get a host spot? So if Penn State loses to Oregon, do you put Penn State behind Tennessee? I don't know how you don't put Penn State behind Tennessee.
I think you do. I think they'll fall. Like I said, I think the only way that it gets smushed to where Notre Dame, and I saw people complaining that Notre Dame was at 4, but they can't be any higher than 5. Guys, it's the ranking. The seeding will be based on the ranking. If Notre Dame was the number 1 team in the country right now, they'd put them at number 1 in the rankings, but seeding, they'd be 5th. Again, I think that the only way that doesn't happen with Notre Dame at 5 is if Oregon loses, because they would have built up so much equity, they would move to 5. 5, which would move Notre Dame down, and then you'd have a cascading effect. The SEC championship is interesting. What if Texas loses? Where do they fall? I think Tennessee is in line that they could potentially host.
I think if you're a Tennessee fan, you are rooting for Georgia to lose and you are rooting for Penn State to lose. But if you had to choose one, you want Penn State to lose. Because I could see the committee saying, well, Georgia beat Tennessee straight up, played an extra game than them. We're going to keep Tennessee where they're at. We're going to put Georgia behind Ohio State, whatever. So if you're a Tennessee fan, I think you are a big Oregon fan this week. That's what I think. All right,
Chad, hit that like, hit that subscribe button. If you donate, it's on topic. It will get read. We're going to start the day off with a $20 donation from Mason Baker. Appreciate it, Mace. Says, fellas, thoughts about the college football expansion to 20 teams.
No.
The Power 4 conferences winners will get buys, and the 1 through 4 seeds, Power 4 championship losers will get the 5 through 8. The last are 12 wild cards. One must be the Group of 5 conference champion and a G5 wild card.
I think that's too many. I think if you put 20 in, they're going to take a game from the regular season because you can't talk about player safety and then make a 20-team playoff on both hands. I mean, maybe.
Let's do this one first.
Yeah, let's do.
We hadn't done one of these.
This is why I wanted 8, man.
Can you bring up the bracket real quick
Yeah,
while
let's
we're
bring up
talking
the
about
bracket.
it, please? Because this is how the seating would actually fall into it.
So if you're on
have
audio,
this.
we got it in the college football. Here we go. So you got your 1 through 4 getting a bye. Oregon at 1, Texas at 2, SMU at 3, Boise State at 4. Then your 8-9 game would be Ohio State hosting Tennessee. Your 7-10 game would be Georgia hosting Indiana. Your 5-12 would be Penn State hosting Arizona State. And your 6-11 would be a rematch of a national championship game that I think sent Brian Kelly to LSU, Notre Dame hosting Alabama. So the matchups are going to be fantastic. Either way, we've said that for multiple weeks, but that doesn't change the fact that there's some inconsistencies.
Let's go to Ed Kiley. What's up, Ed? He says the committee knows the broadcasting partners want Bama in. Eyeballs equal ad revenue, merchandise sales, in-game food orders, etc. Fellas, it's brand bias the way I see it.
It's just, maybe that's right. Maybe that is what's happening. It's just weird because I always thought of Miami as a huge college football brand.
Me too. Me too. But I go back and look at a pattern. Anybody out there, name me one time when Alabama got screwed by the playoff committee. Name me just one time. Crickets. Listen, and it's not Alabama fans' fault. It's not. I wondered maybe if Nick Saban wasn't there, if they wouldn't have that much cachet. I mean, at this point, and Blaine brought this up the other day, the worst team that you can be battling in for that last spot is with Alabama. Because apparently what they did, and it's not like they've won national championships recently. That was Georgia. That was Michigan last year. I mean, it's just apparently Alabama is looked at. And again, I have no problem with Alabama being in this year. But it never breaks bad for them. It always breaks good for them. And that's great for that fan base. But that's why everybody else is like, dude, like this is your favorite kid. This is Jonah Hill off Walk Hard. Wrong kid died. He could play the piano, done it for 17 years. So, Alabama, they're just going to, that's the way it is, I guess. Alabama's just going to get whatever they want. They're the rich kid that gets whatever they want, that gets out of trouble whenever they want, regardless who they lose to or whatever, because their daddy's the mayor of the town and everybody needs to make sure that they can get grants when they need them.
And some of the football they've played this year has shown me that they could win the national championship.
I think there's 10 teams that can win.
Yeah, which is fun. I mean, maybe they go on a run, which will only justify this sort of decision.
But can we say now,
create a cycle?
Can we say now, though, if you're an Alabama fan, I don't want to hear anybody ever complain about officiating. I don't want to hear anybody ever complain about anything that happens on the field because you always get the benefit. I don't want to hear about they didn't call holding, they didn't call pass interference, because when it comes down to it, what's the most important thing? Getting in. I would rather you get me in the playoff regardless than call holding every time it happens. So I don't want to hear any complaining from Alabama fans about anything. And I wish my team was in that position, but they're not. Hell, they can't even get to a bowl game.
Let's go to Sean McDaniel. What's up, Sean? He says those head-to-head losses hurt, but I still think South Carolina is playing the best ball right now out of all the teams we just mentioned.
I mean, I think you're right on both those cases. I think Shane Beamer was right. South Carolina is the last team I'd want to see right now if I was in the college football playoff, but you did lose the head-to-head. That's why, again, when it comes to Bama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina, I think Bama should be in front of the other two. But to me, if you're going to put Miami where they were, that's the thing that doesn't make sense. You either put them in front of those three, being Alabama, South Carolina, or Ole Miss, or behind them. Like I think it's close to a package deal in where they should be ordered. Not that they all should get in, but where they should be ordered.
And if you're South Carolina right now, take pride in the fact you're playing some of the best football in the country. Let that translate to the transfer portal, which Shane Beamer is a king at. He's going to clean up. Let that translate into the signing day today, and let it translate into the bowl game wherever you find yourself. Go beat somebody, get to 10 wins. How incredible would that be? And then come back next year and say, we're even better.
And there's a chip on our shoulder.
Yes.
Now, like hell's coming with us. That's the way Shane Beamer.
Like we thought Florida State would try and come back this year, but that didn't happen.
They didn't have Lenore Sellers coming back.
Yeah.
$2 donation from Mama Locke. She said, will they fix the fact the number 5 seed has the easiest path to the championship?
You know, this is another kind of qualm that I have. Now, to me, I don't think it's fair to say that they have the easiest path out of everybody because there are 4 teams that get a bye. I would rather have to play one less game, right, than get to play the 12 seed at home. But if you're going to compare the 5 seed to all the other teams that aren't getting a bye, why shouldn't they have the easiest path? They're the 5 seed, the one right behind the 4 seed. The 8 seed should not have a better path than the 5 seed. But I think the argument they're making is, well, when you look at the bracket, pull the bracket back up real quick, the one you just had. Because this is the argument, and I actually kind of understand this to a certain extent. The argument they're making is that the 5 gets to play the 12, then they get to play the quote-unquote worst of the top 4 to get into the semifinals, where then you would see the 1 or the 2 anyway. I can understand that a little bit. I guess there is a way to fix it, but I really don't hear people complaining about that in college basketball as much when the seeding is basically exactly the same without the bye.
Which is,
Boise
like,
State's
again,
going to get a bye. That's hilarious.
But, well, maybe. Like,
Well,
again, they play
not
this weekend. Like, what happens if it's Georgia? What happens if it's Georgia sitting at the 4 seed?
Well,
because they have multiple losses, but they beat Texas, and Texas is knocked down. It's not a given that the SEC is going to be in the second spot there. So then all of a sudden, if you're Penn State, well, let's just say in this scenario, you're Penn State, you beat Arizona State, congrats, you get to go play Georgia.
Well, David, let me throw this scenario at you.
How it should be.
What if
Be fun. I'd love to see it.
What if UNLV beats Boise State and then
Yeah.
Clemson beats SMU?
I know. Then it's a whole mess.
Then you talk about the 3 and the 4 getting really, really interesting and wild. That's what's
Well, that brings us to a $2 donation. I love where your head's at. He says, what if Boise State loses, UNLV is in, you can't drop state, correct?
if I'm Arizona State or I'm Iowa State, I am rooting for UNLV and I am rooting for Clemson.
Yeah.
Because here's the crazy part. You may go from the 12 to the 3.
To the 3. Exactly.
To not the 4, to the 3.
Exactly.
So, but, in that same token, what happens if Boise State wins and Clemson wins? Does Boise State then go to the 3 and Arizona State, or Iowa State's the 4? Or is Boise State the 4 and Arizona State and Iowa State's the 3 and Clemson is the 5? I don't know. That's what's going to be magical about this weekend.
Let's go to a $5 donation from Todd Zillow. Love the name, man. He says, SEC bias, ? I see Big Ten bias in the current bracket. Ohio State hosting and Penn State with the cakewalk path. Come on, fellas. You got to see what I see.
No, I tried to tell you guys before the season started, and I made my bracket to look like this. 4 SEC teams, 4 Big Ten teams. I had one from the ACC and Big 12, one from the Group of 5, and then I had Notre Dame making the playoff, which they're going to have. I think the committee would love nothing more than if there's an even split between SEC and Big Ten.
That's what they want.
The 2 moneymakers, if they can any way justify 4 apiece, even split, and Notre Dame gets in there, they're going to try and do it.
I don't see the Big Ten bias. Every team that is 11-1 is in there. The Big Ten just happens to have the most of them. So I don't see it as much. I think if you're Indiana, you have nothing to worry about, obviously. Right? If you're Penn State, you have nothing to worry about. Oregon and Ohio State, they got nothing to worry about. They deserve to be in. Now, we can, again, have a discussion about who should host between Ohio State and Tennessee. But I think, again, could that have been part of the, hey, we'll let Alabama in the SEC, but, hey, Tony Petitti, the Big Ten, we'll give you the home game in the 8-9. I don't think it's that deep. That's a little too far for me. But, no, I don't see Big Ten bias. What's up, YouTube? Hey, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Whether you're happy about the playoff reveal, sad, we're going to get great matchups either way, but we're going to break down and continue to break it down only the way that Crain and Company can.